Elected as mayor in 2016, Stockton's Michael Tubbs has gained a reputation for innovation. He joins us today to discuss Stockton's future and share his personal story. Mayor Tubbs, Stockton has been named a 5-time All-America city by the National Civic League, one of only 11 cities in the nation with 5 awards. Conversely, in 2011, Forbes ranked Stockton as America's most miserable city. What do you think Forbes would say if they were talking about Stockton today?
If Forbes was talking about Stockton today, they would say what I think everyone's beginning to say, and that Stockton's a city with so much potential. The most diverse city in this country, but it's also a city where we're making progress and not talking about problems, even though we're still not perfect. I think they would talk about the fact that in Stockton, you have the first basic income pilot in this country. That in Stockton, we've seen a 40% reduction in gun violence. That in Stockton yesterday, the world's first data center powered by water had docked at our port. So I think Forbes would say that Stockton has turned a corner from misery, and it's really one of the up-and-coming American cities and a place that believes in opportunity and justice for everyone.
Now, it's interesting. You were elected back in 2016 as mayor after serving on the city council. And at the time, I believe you were 26 years old?
Yes, sir.
All right. Some might say, what does a 26-year-old have in terms of life experience to be a big city mayor? What attributes do you think that you brought to Stockton that made you uniquely qualified to lead at that moment and today?
It's a fair question. Is when we spent all campaign answering. And part of it was understanding that the median age in the city was only 28, 29 years old. So the majority of people in the city who are paying taxes, who are creating the revenue that provides the jobs and really the revenue for city government, were folks under the age of 30, under the age of 35. And then part of it was also understanding that what I lacked in life experience, I was able to make up for with listening. And also understanding that the mayor can't do everything by himself. So it's important to surround myself and hire staff that reflect a more seasoned in terms of time spent on earth and life, but also just making the argument that I spent 4 years on city council at a time the city had declared bankruptcy, at a time when we were figuring out how to reduce our homicide rate, at a time of great challenge in the city. And life experience isn't the same thing as elected experience. So I had 4 years of elected experience. There wasn't anyone in the race who had more local Stockton City Council governing experience than me. And then also just giving people the freedom to know that by electing someone young, you're gonna get someone with energy, although I don't think energy, just because you're not young doesn't mean you don't have energy, but told the voters know that I am young and I do have energy, but also an openness and a willingness to try new things, to question everything, and to do what was necessary to move the community forward.
You know, when you talk about elective experience, you've got significantly more than when you got started. What's been the hardest lesson along the way for you to learn and to accept?
The hardest, I think there's really 2 or 3 in terms of hard lessons. Number one is that if you want to go fast, you go by yourself, but if you want to go far and make things institutionalized and make things sustainable, you have to go together. I realized some of the things we've done incredibly well was when I gave myself, my staff, and the community time to work together to reach a consensus. And the times even if the action was right, the times I came with a little bit more controversy came because I was prescriptive for the solution and didn't give time for the other players, the other stakeholders to be part of that process of framing and coming to that solution. And then number 2, I think the other difficult thing is that everything is it's about relationships and influence, meaning that you have to spend the time in connecting with people who agree with you and who don't agree with you to kind of build the coalition needed to govern. And then the last thing is that government can't do everything, that there's always going to be a problem that needs to be solved. And that doesn't mean get complacent with having problems, but it also means being realistic and kind to yourself and saying, well, hey, we can't hit a home run on every issue deserves a home run. We're not going to hit a home run on every issue. So let's knock it out the park on the ones we can. And let's make sure we're making some sort of progress, whether it's a bunt, whether it's a walk, whether it's a single, And I'm still learning that last lesson for sure.
Well, you're known as an innovator. And part of innovation, by its very definition, is experimentation, which means some things are going to work and some things aren't. How do you resolve that tension in leading on innovation and trying to solve what's possible to solve with the fact that every step of the way you're being measured and asked to explain or called to account on what doesn't work? How do you continue to move forward?
Yeah, that makes it difficult. And I think one of the rules I have for myself is not to innovate for the sake of innovating, but really taking risks, being bold, and innovating on issues or on things where the status quo is just so untenable that even not being successful in the innovation is probably still marginally better than what we're experiencing. And that's why a lot of our innovation has been focused on poverty, focused on violent crime, focused on education, and focused on homelessness. Because those are like 4 issues in the city where the status quo is just so untenable that in many instances, I can't imagine what worse or what a lot worse would look like. And I think that grounding in terms of, no, the status quo doesn't work, I think gives us not a lot of rope, but a little bit more rope to kind of experiment and to innovate, but also be mindful of how you explain that to the public. So it doesn't look like you're just playing around.
So let's talk about one of those innovations. One of the things that you have led on has been the concept of universal income. The other person who most recently was talking about that was Andrew Yang. But you actually led on this issue, and now you talk about bringing other people together. There seems to be a coalition of mayors that are interested in this. Tell us about this experiment.
Yeah, so when my first year as mayor in October, we announced that we were going to do a pilot about something that very few people had heard of, and it felt crazy to people, of guaranteed income. And that we were going to identify folks throughout the community that represent the community to receive $500 a month for 18 months with no strings attached. And then at the end of the 18 months was in July, and we have so many lessons and so many learnings from that time. And then with COVID-19 and with the protests in the country around structural violence and the violence of poverty, we extended the pilot in Stockton to January, but we also decided to use what we had learned in terms of being able to trust people, in terms of people are working, but work isn't paying, in terms of this is not some crazy futuristic idea, but this idea is as old as this country. Thomas Paine was talking about this in the late 1700s. I learned about it from studying Dr. King, who talked about it in a backdrop similar to this one. So we launched a group called the Mayors for Guaranteed Income. It's a national group so far of about 15 mayors from throughout the country who are saying that A, we need a guaranteed income during COVID-19, and also B, we'll also pilot in our cities models that can be used post-COVID-19 to see if this should be a part of our social contract, which I think it should be.
Tell us how this program works. What's it called again?
The Stockton program is called the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, and that's where we gave $500 a month for 18 months to randomly selected residents who lived, the only criterion was they lived in zip codes at or below the city's median, which means there's people in the program who make $80,000, $90,000, and there's people in the program who make $20,000, $15,000. There's people who are working, there's people who are disabled, there's people who are immigrants, there's even some people who are undocumented receiving this $500. And building on that, and you can find more information on that, at stocktondemonstration.org for viewers who are interested. But in addition to that, a week ago, we launched the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, mayorsforagi.org, which is a coalition of mayors who are saying, you know what, we want to test and pilot a basic income in our cities. And we also want to see a basic income as part of COVID-19 response, because we know that unemployment's not a one-time event, that bills aren't one time, and that while we try to restart up the economy, the best way to do that is to invest in the people who make the economy go in the first place.
And incidentally, what have been your observations along the way from how people have interacted and utilized this program thus far?
Yeah, I think it challenged a lot of the assumptions I had. The first assumption it challenged was this idea that people were struggling because they weren't working. or they couldn't find work. And that just is not true, that the vast majority of people, not just in the program, but in this country, who can work, do work. The issue is that work isn't paying what is necessary to live, to afford housing, to pay for emergencies. We know before COVID-19, 1 in 2 Americans cannot afford one $500 emergency. And we also know that 1 in 2 Americans aren't not working. So these are working people we're talking about who aren't able to pay for basic necessities. The second assumption that was challenged was this growing up kind of Protestant home, this idea of dignity being attached to work. This idea if a person doesn't work, they don't eat. And realizing that, no, dignity has to first be attached to one's personhood. And if we actually treated people with dignity or afforded everyone dignity, then people wouldn't have to work in undignified conditions where they don't have paid sick time, where they don't have family leave, where they don't have the ability to schedule because their schedules are in flux all the time, when they don't have wages. Where now, even during this pandemic, there are essential workers who are still underpaid, who are putting their lives, their health on the line, their health and lives of their families, and are still after work lining up in food banks to get food. And just realizing that how we think the economy works is an ideal, but it's not an actuality. I think we all live in a country where everyone who works can afford housing, can afford healthcare. That's not the country we live in. And just hearing the stories of the residents of Stockton, how they've used the money to find better jobs, to pay for dentures, to pay for tuning for their kids, really challenged a lot of the assumptions I had about the economy and how it worked and who it worked for.
When you talk about challenging assumptions and the impact of programs like this, particularly on separating what people might think about a condition or how people are going to react with it, you've spoken often about structural violence, and you used that term a few moments ago. How does that term apply to the conditions you're seeking to address in your city?
Yeah, structural violence is the entire frame of how I try to govern. And structural violence, I learned reading, now where do we go from here? Mountains Beyond Mountains by Dr. Paul Farmer. And he talked about the work he did as a doctor in Haiti and how he realized that once the people got to him in his hospital, there was a bunch of things that led to them coming there that weren't the choices they made. And he defined structural violence as the avoidable impairment of basic human needs, like the things we know are just the basic necessities one needs to be fully, to be part of the human experience. And I think for me, when I think of structural violence, I think of the way kind of poverty, environments, all the things outside of individual choices create the context in which choices are made, and how a lot of those things are policy choices. And how as a government actor, I have to make sure that when we do land use, when we do budget allocations, when we do ordinances, like everything we do, we're intentional about ensuring that folks are able to meet their basic needs, particularly if it's avoidable. And then I think the simplest definition is it's just all the ways our society, our institutions, our norms, our policies create outcomes that are violent or outcomes that are that cause us great stress, because it's like this is not who we want to be and it's not who we should be. It's not who we are in our heart of hearts as a society or as a community.
Well, when you talk about how those types of policies shape outcomes later on, it almost sounds like it harkens back to an essay you wrote when you were 17. And I want to read a portion from it and get you to react to it.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. You said the following. At the age of 12, I finally saw my father in an orange jumpsuit looking weak and vulnerable. I couldn't resist the urge to ask, "Why are you in here?" He looked at me in my eyes and explained how the system was designed for him to go to prison. Michael, when the oppressor designs the world in a way so that prison is your destiny, from birth you are set up to fail. I decided to comply and give, quote unquote, the man what he wants. And he continued, "You're a black man in America, and prison or death." Based on the life you've lived since that conversation, How would the 29-year-old Michael Tubbs respond to his father's statement today in the context of what you just said about structural violence?
Yeah, no, it's so funny because I remember when I first wrote that, it was almost a rejection, as if he was fatalistic, he was giving up, and I was going to do everything in my power to prove him wrong. That what he said was false. And I think now, as a 29-year-old who's been a mayor of a city council member, I recognize that there was a lot of truth, sadly, in what he was saying, and that not to be fatalistic, not to be deterministic, but I mean, there is data that illustrates that there are systems, there are policies, there are practices, and that's what part of why people are protesting that lead to such bad outcomes. So the 29-year-old me would say definitely the structure is real, that structural violence exists, but that the only way to change structural violence isn't to comply, isn't to give in, isn't to give up. It's to acknowledge that it's real, but then to exercise agency and doing everything in your power to change it. And that's sort of how I've decided to live my life, how I've decided to govern, is governing wide-eyed with an understanding that the American dream we talk about is just that, it is a dream. And that while as a mayor, while as an elected official, it's my job to work as hard as I can to make that dream a reality, but also not to talk to people who live the American nightmare and tell them like, oh no, it's a dream. Like, oh, you need to work hard to get to the dream. It's like, no. What you're feeling is real. Like what you're protesting about is real. What the poverty, the environmental racism, the inferior schools, all those things are real, and those aren't your fault. But the only way we change those things is by using the agency that we have. And I mean, probably a longer answer, but that's sort of the ongoing conversation I've had, because you can always say, well, you know what, that's just the way it is. And you will be justified in some ways in doing that. But I just refuse to allow the decisions of those before I was here, even the decisions of some of those folks now that I'm here, to dictate the outcomes for myself and for my children, for my community, at least without a fight, at least without a real conversation, or at least without a push around how do we make this better and more just.
When you bring that experience to the table in terms of the leadership of your administration in the city of Stockton, what is the biggest disconnect between the colleagues and the constituencies you're working with in leadership and the needs of the people that they represent, but probably don't hear from very much?
I think the incentive structure in many ways is off. So to be an elected official, you have to raise money to be elected, and you have to get votes. And oftentimes those who have the most at stake in an election, who rely the most on public resources, often work jobs that are unable to vote, or for a lot of reasons choose not to exercise the right to vote sometimes, and also don't have a lot of disposable income with which to influence political decisions. So I think because of that, if you're not careful, it creates an echo chamber of people who have disposable time and disposable income, who could come to council meetings, who could come to your fundraisers, who could write you, who could call you, who can go eat dinner with you, et cetera, and that frame your view of the entire city. And I tell people all the time, like, no, those folks are my constituents, but so are the people who don't have time to come to council meetings. So are the people who may not even speak English. So are the people who are working incredibly hard. So it's really illustrating to my colleagues that as a representative, you have to represent more than just your viewpoint or more than just your experience, and you have to be active and adamant about reaching out and learning the experience of other people. I know I've had to do that with my constituents who are older, my constituents who may have immigrated from another country, my constituents who have a different sexual orientation, my constituents who have different gender. Like I'm constantly learning and trying to make sure I'm representing as many viewpoints as possible, or at least understanding them, because it's really easy to be in a bubble and say, well, from my experience, or the 5 people I talked to, or the 3 people that texted me, and have that make the rules for the entire community.
Right. And, sometimes we can have those conversations, but not everybody comes along. Recently, you were on the losing side of a pretty lopsided vote related to COVID-19 in terms of prior to state orders mandating masks. And you were the only person, if memory serves me correct, who voted for mandatory masking within Stockton, and your colleagues voted against you. When you don't get people to follow along in terms of that leadership and you're regrouping, what are the things that you're thinking about? How does that impact how you move forward in trying to share the issues you have to address?
Yeah, that was a tough one. Because usually I don't put something on the agenda unless I'm fairly certain it'll pass, if not the first time, the second time. But I did it, and I figured I didn't have the votes actually, but I put it on the agenda anyway because it was just an issue of public health, and I just don't want my son, my family, my diabetic grandmother, my asthmatic aunt to look at me and say, "Well, what did you do?" Knowing if no one else, your own family can be impacted by the people not wearing masks and the massive spread of COVID-19, and you have authority and didn't do anything or even try. So that was kind of my motivation to say, you know what, I'm here, I'll try it. I think in terms of reflection, I realized that some of my colleagues just don't have to be as tuned in as I am 24/7 to what's happening, reading science, talking to doctors, talking to public health officers, talking to constituents, talking to employers, talking to other mayors, talking to the state public health people, and to get an understanding of what's necessary to mitigate the spread. And I wish I had more time, but we're in a pandemic. But I wish I had a couple of weeks to bring them along, to do a presentation to them about the importance of masks, because I realized that some of my colleagues get their news from different sources. Some of my colleagues believe the president. Some of my colleagues watch Fox News. And because of that, I just didn't have the time to build consensus, although I'm very thankful for the governor for saying, like, no, we have to do this. I think now all my colleagues are aligned with, they may not like it, but we do have to wear masks.
So you're mayor of a major metropolitan city, and at the same time, from an age perspective, you are right in the middle of the constituency that was protesting and demonstrating related to the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the bigger issue of police and community relations throughout this country. How have those deaths affected you and your position on the role of police, given how much of your city's budget, which I believe is about 55%, that's devoted to supporting the police department?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I was 19 years old when Oscar Grant was murdered. I was 21 years old when Trayvon Martin was murdered. I was 23 years old when Tamir Rice was murdered. I was 24 when Michael Brown was murdered. And spent all that, even on city council, I was out on the US 101 blocking traffic, protesting Michael Brown. I planned Trayvon Martin rallies at Stanford. I think I was 26, 25 when Sandra Bland was murdered. I was 12 or 11 hearing about Sean Bell. So my entire life, or at least as long as I've been conscious, has been spent with this reality that police violence, racist violence, impacts people who look like me disproportionately. And so I think
violence does as well, because one of the things that you wrote about in the past is that the death of your cousin was one of the drivers for you to get involved in the conversation and leadership in the first place. And so there's a duality, but right now the conversation is the system has to be changed. And given the budget of Stockton, it's part of the national conversation that's happening in cities across the country. There are those who say defund police departments. Where are you on that issue?
Well, let me finish the last answer. Then I promise you I'll directly answer on that question because it's a great one. So I said all that to say that as a Black person, a Black man who's 29 years old with a Black son, there's nothing about and that's why I call it structural violence, because I think the causes of police violence and the causes of disproportionate gun violence and leading cause of death for Black and Latino males in the state being between 1835 being gun violence are the same. It's rooted in like structural violence. So that's why I keep saying these protests around structural violence, because I do think that we have to have a conversation about violence in all its forms. Although there is a difference between someone who your taxpayers are supporting, who's given the authority to protect and serve the community, killing unarmed innocent people, versus another citizen who you're not paying their salary, you're not paying their pension, and there will be accountability. And there is a system in place where you could reasonably expect some sort of justice, which is not the case yet, and oftentimes in officer-involved shootings. But to the point around Stockton and our police budget, since my first ride-along, I realized that we call on our officers to do so much. I remember as a 23-year-old, my first police ride-along, we spent time doing everything: social work, therapy, jobs, coaching. Like, we were just, people called 911 mental health for everything. And I realized that this is not sustainable. And I think that's when people say defund the police, they're really talking about, oh, and my understanding or how I approach it, or what I agree with, is looking at the function of police and determining who's best equipped to be a social worker. I would argue a social worker. Who's best equipped to be a therapist? I would argue a therapist. Who's best equipped to be a job? I would argue a job. And then who's best equipped to deal with violence and to protect folks in armed situations or situations where bodily harm. And in that case, absolutely a police officer. So in Stockton's case, because of the bankruptcy, we decimated our police budget by 33% in 2010 or 11, and we laid off a third of our officers. And in fact, today, even with 55% of our budget, we're still one of the lowest per capita staff police forces in this country, per capita. And our budget, it's 55% police because in the past decade, 2 times the citizens of the city voted to tax themselves more, to pay for more officers, to pay for a baseline level of law enforcement, which suggests that these aren't decisions made by the mayor or the city council. The citizens of the community twice in majority said we want more money for cops. So there's no way to undo that without some sort of ballot initiative where the people say, you know what, now we want to take some of that money. But I think the solution is actually just growing the pie and including all the things we want to see. And I'm just not convinced that we have to decimate our police budget to do that.
And Mayor Tubbs, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, and good luck to you and your initiatives in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And that's our show. Thanks to our guests, and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE. All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.